Welcome to a blustery but beautiful day here at Staten Island Airfield. And today we're going to be testing FPV gear once again. What I'm really looking to find out is what is the difference when I'm running the Goggles V2 with the Vista and Air unit versus when I run the Goggles 2 with the Vista and Air unit. Just so we know where we're starting with, I am running the iFlight Crystal patch antennas and the True RC stubby antennas on my Goggles V2. The Goggles 2 will have its stock antennas, and both of the goggles have had their respective hacks added to the system. They're both going to be running 50 megabit per second mode, 40 hertz mode on the Goggles 2. Both are going to be running on channel 1 across the board to make sure we have consistency. And what's unique about this field is it does drop away quite a bit. Where we're standing on the airfield itself, there's actually landfill underneath this. So it's packed really tightly, very dense, and penetration actually is extremely challenging in this location, especially when you get below the field height. With as many variables as I can control in this test, I am going to be flying different aircrafts. I'm going to be flying two different sizes. I'm going to be flying a 3.5 inch, which will consist of the Emax Tiny Hawk 2 HD on the Goggles 2, my Skylight build on the Goggles V2. I'm also going to fly two 5-inch drones, both being the Demibot builds, very similar, just different motors. But at the end of the day, I'm not trying to compare flight dynamics. I'm just trying to compare, is the flight experience on the Goggles V2 better or worse than the Goggles 2 in a very similar situation? I'm just really curious if the backwards compatibility mode is as good on the Goggles 2 with stock everything as it is to the Goggles V2, and is the experience flying the O3 better on the Goggles 2 than it is on the Goggles V2. Either way, let's get into it. Let's get goggles on, quads up in the air. Let's have some fun. See you in a second. Plugged in, set up, goggles are set to 50 megabits per second mode in channel 1. Let's get in the air with the Skylight and the Goggles V2 first. So the way this is gonna work is I'm gonna come out and do some flippy floppies right in front of me, just to see how the performance of the system works up close. Obviously it's gonna be fine, completely fine. Oh, we scared the geese. Now let's do this little, so it's very windy right now, and I apologize for any wind noise, but we're gonna do this little, ooh, and I'm already starting to get some breakup. And I'm kind of faced towards this direction too with the patches. Cruising down here, definitely getting a lot of pixelation. I'm assuming this is coming through in the DVR, but that is hard to see, to say the least. So huge amount of pixelation. You can even see it in the grass there too. That pixelation is starting to go away. Come up over this tree. It'll come down. And if I'm feeling it, I think with these 3 inches I may not. We'll see. Okay, in this weather, those power loops are gonna be super difficult, but power loop done. Then we're gonna find this other path down here. So this is about 90 degrees from me. Whoa. I've already cratered down to 30 megabits per, or 30 milliseconds for latency. Wow. I'm getting a ton of pixelation. And this is 90 degrees from me, so this is probably the worst it can be. So it's really not getting any of the patch broadcasts. So we're gonna come back up it. As you can see, the grass is a nightmare. It's just all blocky and chunky. This is not a good flying experience. This is really hard, because like that, there's a lot of little stuff that hangs down below. So let's come back up out of this if we can make it. And we did it. I've flown that so many times that I could probably do it blindfolded, but good to see that it made it. But that was a bit rough. So you can see I'm about 90 degrees facing. So there's me. Right over there is where that little channel is. Let's come in for a land, and let's switch to the Goggles V2, or sorry, this is the Goggles V2. Let's switch over to the 3-inch quad on the Goggles 2 and see how it does. Now that the wind has died down a little bit, let's get the second 3-inch up in the air and get into testing. So actually, before we take off, to go in here and hit record, take off. That's one of the biggest differences between the Goggles V2 and Goggles 2 that I seem to have found. You can't auto record on the Vistas at takeoff. I may be missing this option, but that's actually why the first time I recorded this video, it didn't work, which was super frustrating. But the flippy floppies look good so far. We're gonna cruise down here, and you can see the wind is pushing this quad around a lot. So we're gonna do our best. Cruise down here. It looks, to me, this looks a little better. It's a little bobbier because I'm getting pushed around so much by the wind. But I feel like I'm getting a little less pixelation. I haven't changed the direction that I'm standing in. I feel like this is way better. Not way better, it's better. Let's cruise up over here. See if we can sneak in this power loop before the wind gets hardcore nasty again. Well, it's kind of an Emmelman. We'll call it an Emmelman power loop. Back through, okay. Still looking good, still locked to that 50 megabits per second mode. I didn't see, whoa, got blown into that again. Okay, whoa, yep. Down to 20, there's the little red bar at the bottom, letting you know my signal's crap. Here we go. 26, 27. Down here I feel like I have a little, like slightly better video feed, but not anything to write home about. Super blocky, super chunky. Also, for the record, both of these quads are running the walk snail antenna on the Caddx Vistas, which I think is very much worse than the little like cherry bomb rush FPV antennas that you get with some of the Vistas. Now we're out. There we go. Back to normal. Yeah, so that was bad, but I would say it's better than the V2. Not much better, but a little better. So let's come in and land and get the 5-inch quads out, because that should be much better for the wind. And there we go, off the table. Sweet. And let's go up to the top, swipe down, stop the recording, and there we go. Demibot plugged in, Goggles 2 still on. Let's get up in the air and see how this thing does in comparison to the Vista. Interestingly, out of the gate, this is only at 33 megabits per second. It should be it should be noted that here in Staten Island we have a ton of RF interference. I usually fly channel 2. I figured channel 1 was a fairer test because I want kind of the worst environment. So just here in the field, it's actually lower than the original air unit, but I am getting less blocking. So take that with what you will. Cruising down here, it's definitely less blocky. Obviously, this feels a whole lot more controlled than those 3 inches because it gets blown around a whole lot less. Still getting blown around. Down here, it's still definitely blocky, but I feel like I can see a heck of a lot more. Trying to maintain a slower speed. Still locked at 32 megabits per second. Woo! Come up here. Yeah, just in this area right here, I feel like there's a lot less blocking in that grass. I'll be curious to see if it shows up in the DVR. Woo! That wind, yo. A little better power loop, but as you can see, I'm still getting knocked around by the wind. Great overall reception. Let me stabilize here before we enter this little Death Star trench run. Sorry, Disney. And I am seeing the bitrate fall, holding at 2930, so higher than the Vista. Down here, still at 30. So the picture down here is way better than it was on the Vista. I don't know if that's just better antenna or just the O3 air unit is better RF-wise. but this is much more flyable. Come up here into kind of the worst section for reception. Yeah, I mean, this is way more flyable than it was on the Baby Hawk, or it's way more flyable than on the Baby Hawk HD. About the same, no, still better. Yeah, a lot better actually than the Skylight. So I would say overall, O3 definitely wins. But let's see how the Goggles 2 on O3 does. Come in. Touchdown. Swap goggles, swap quads, and we'll get back up in the air. Once again, bitten by the bind bug. If you weren't already aware, every time you switch between the Vista and O3 Air unit on the Goggles V2, you have to rebind at least one quad. So if you're switching to the O3 Air unit, so if you're switching from the Vista to the O3 Air unit, you have to rebind one Vista. All the rest of your binds will then reconnect, but you have to do it once each time you switch. So here I just did it for the O3, now we should be good up in the air. Let's get this cracking. Woo! Interestingly, compared to the Goggles 2, this one is locked at 50 megabits per second out here in the middle of the field. Still on channel 1, same as before. As you can see, the wind is real gnarly still. Let's see if we can get this little trench run done. Bum 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 bum. Sorry. Alright, so honestly, I would say this is better. We're still at 50 megabits per second locked. I will say that I am now faced towards this. Whoops, hit some stuff. I'm faced towards this direction with my patch antenna, so I would expect the penetration to be better. Still locked at 50 megabits per second. Cruising around here down at the bottom. All looks good. Still, this is a fantastic picture. This definitely looks crisper and more detailed than the Goggles Goggles 2. We're gonna cruise down here. Nice crisp power loop. Still getting pushed around by the wind. And so now we're about 90 degrees from myself. This should be the real test. And we're still, oh, there we go, there's 48 megabits per second. Still at 50. Ooh, there we go. 22, 29. 30. So according to the on-screen display, these should be about equal, the Goggles 2 and the Goggles V2. I will say that while it's reading at 30 megabits per second here, I think the Goggles 2 may have looked sharper. We'll see if the DVR reflects it. Actually, no, I retract that. Down here, the Goggles V2 definitely look like it has more clarity. But in the transition, I don't know that there was a whole lot of difference in it. Once again, different antennas and patch antennas on this drone, but I'm 90 degrees from those patches, so it shouldn't really be a benefit. Let's cruise back up here. Yep, there's the image falling apart. Tons of blockiness, but still definitely flyable. Way better than on the Vista on either system. Back to 50 megabits per second. Cruising home, looking all gorgeous. So I came straight out of that, and you'll see that I'm turned more than 90 degrees towards that direction, which is where we originally flew down. So honestly, the patches shouldn't have made much of a difference down that direction. And I'm actually really impressed by the Goggles 2's stock antennas, because those are performing quite well. Let's come in and get a landing. Oh, no, I'm not landing on the table. Way too windy to try a precision landing. And there we go. Flights are done, footage reviewed. Overall, I don't think there's a ton in it between the Goggles V2 and the Goggles 2. I think the performance difference that I had flying down that first little trench run was down to the patch antennas providing that little bit of extra range. I think going down that second trench run with each system showed that the omnidirectional performance of those goggles too is fantastic. It's actually really impressive. I don't think there's a ton in it as far as raw performance goes between the Goggles V2 or the Goggles 2 on either system. I think both perform extremely well on both systems. I will give the slight nod in performance to the Goggles V2, primarily because you can change both antennas. One of the Goggle 2's antennas is baked into the front of those goggles, so you can't change it. So I think there is your performance difference. While this is not a review of the Goggles 2 because I need to spend more time with it, I do want to give a little bit more of a takeaway to this if you're trying to decide between the Goggles V2 and the Goggles 2. Overall, I think the biggest difference between the two is quality of life. On the Goggles V2, the performance of the fit and feel of the goggles is so much better. The Goggles 2 are way lighter and they do feel so much lighter on your face, but I don't know that that's a big enough difference to overcome the weird fit of the Goggles 2. Obviously, this is going to be extremely personal. If the Goggles 2 do fit your face, perfect. But the Goggles V2, I think, fits more faces better. The biggest quality of life improvement for the Goggles 2 are that when you switch between the Vista and original air unit system and the new O3 system, you don't have to rebind. Everybody knows about this binding bug for the Goggles V2. It's been there since day one. Super, super frustrating, especially if you have a mixture of quads because you'll be out flying. All of a sudden you realize that you need to be able to press a bind button. It's a lot of frustration. And it's honestly one of the reasons I think a lot of pilots are now switching to the Goggles 2 who have a mixture of quads. The one downside to the Goggles 2 when it comes to that same compatibility is I, for the life of me, cannot figure out why it doesn't have a record on arm. That is a feature that I use on all of my quads. I really like that feature, and it's going to be super frustrating if every time I have to or if I want to record the DVR on the goggles of the quad I'm flying, when it's a Vista, I have to swipe down, tap record, swipe up before I fly every time. That's going to get old real quick. Hopefully that's just something that I haven't found or figured out yet, but I will update later when I do a final Goggles 2 review after I've flown them for at least 2 or 3 months. Honestly, there's not a ton in it. As you can see in that video, make your own conclusions. I am rendering this video out in 4K, so watch it in the highest resolution you possibly can, and that'll give you the best idea of what I'm seeing in the goggles as far as the video feed. Obviously, the video looks different because the screens are different in the different goggles. The screens in the Goggles 2 look far better than the Goggles V2, but I think the raw video feed is pretty much identical, whichever goggle you choose. With all that said, thank you for joining me in today's video. I will see you in the next one. As always, if you like the video, hit the like button below. Leave me a comment. Have you flown both systems? Have you figured out how to auto record on the Vistas with the Goggles 2? Let me know down below. You'll be my best friend if you figure that one out. And as always, I put affiliate links in the bottom for all the equipment that I use to film these videos. They help the channel out. They don't cost you anything. It's much appreciated. As always, catch you in the next video. Bye.